Okay, so we're back with lesson 5. We've set up our database in the MongoDB cloud. A couple people had just asked about how to make sure they get their student license for if they're using WebStorm. So the way to do that, if you are using WebStorm and your 30-day trial expired, is you just can search for WebStorm. It'll take you to the developer site, which is jetbrains.com. And on the JetBrains site, if you click on the account link, you first have to register and create an account for free. And once you've registered, there will be an option in there that says apply for a student license. It'll ask you what school you're at, when are you graduating, say next year, so you get your license for a full year, don't say this year. Put in your student email address, and once that happens, they will email you with a license code, or they'll put it in your account. And then once you have that license code, you just open up WebStorm, and if you go under help, the licensing should be in here. I think under help and typically under register. There'll be a place here where you can either get your license from the code they send you, or once they verify you as a student, you just put in your JetBrains username and password. And then that will give you, so I just reactivated my, renewed my subscription. It'll give you access for 365 days if you do that. So I'm gonna just, I've opened my application from last week. I just want to get it running so we can have a look at it. So I'll use NodeMon to start my project. We can open it up at localhost 3000. And here was our static site. We just had a home page, and we did an about. And then we have this food link that we want that page to display a list of food in MongoDB. And then we want to be able to add and edit and delete from that list. So our application right now isn't connected in any way to MongoDB. So in order to do that, we're going to use our good old friend npm, and we're going to use an important package called Mongoose. So Mongoose is an object document wrapper. It kind of does the same thing. It's a data access library. So with ASP.NET, we used Entity Framework. Entity Framework was the library that allowed our .NET application to talk to SQL Server. So in Node, when we're working with Node and MongoDB, Mongoose is that interface or that bridge that allows the database and the web application to communicate. So there are other packages, but Mongoose is the most common. So we'll use Mongoose, we'll need to install it. We'll use Mongoose to connect to the database. So something like this, mongoose.connect, where we supply our connection string to the database. And then we also use Mongoose to create models. So we're going to create a food.js model. Even though there's no schema in the database, in our Node code, we'll describe what does a food item look like. It has a name, it has a country, and then if we want to add anything else to it, we can just add it to our food model and save it to the database without having to change the database at all, which is kind of neat. So the first thing we need to do is install Mongoose. So I'm going to stop my server for a minute. I want to run the command npm I mongoose. So we want to install Mongoose in this project. So this project can connect and talk to MongoDB. We're not installing it globally. We don't need it for all projects, just npm I mongoose. I know it's a little hard to see. So we'll run that command. and npm will install the latest copy of Mongoose for us. We also get this warning when we're done. It says there are 6 vulnerabilities, and we can run the command npm audit fix to try to fix them. So I may as well run that command. So that's just showing up right here, npm audit fix. While we're at it, we may as well try to fix any vulnerabilities in the npm packages. Sometimes this works. Some of the vulnerabilities it can't automatically fix, but we'll try it. So I'll follow this command that's recommended, npm space audit space fix. Oftentimes, this just involves upgrading some of the dependencies to newer versions. So I'll run that command, and then it'll give us a report after and let us know if any of those vulnerabilities got repaired. I won't spend too much time on this. If it doesn't work, we're going to move on. Okay, so it says it fixed 4 of 6. 2 of them we would require manual review on. I'm not going to worry about those for now. We fixed what we could, the easy way. So I'm going to close all my files just to keep it simple. And then I want to open up my app.js. So typically we connect to the database in here. We've installed Mongoose, so we're going to need to add a reference to it. So I'm going to create a Mongoose variable, and we'll require the Mongoose package. In order to connect to MongoDB, our app.js needs to use Mongoose. We can't connect until, I don't want to connect until after our application is set up on line 13. So I'm going to scroll down a bit. Maybe we'll do our connection here. After our routing on line 25 and 26, as soon as our application starts, we want it to connect to the database. Now, we could put our connection string right in app.js. It's not generally advisable. We're better off to create a separate configuration file, like we did in ASP.NET with package.json, and we'll store the database connection in there. So it's not part of the actual code, it's separate. So before we write our database connection, we're going to create a separate configuration file. So I'm going to right-click my folder at the top. I'm going to make a new directory that I'll call config. So any configuration information will be stored in there. And then in my config, I'm going to make a new JavaScript file that I'll call globals. So any global variables, like my database connection, we'll put in there. Later on, when we enable things like Google Login, we'll store the API keys in there as well. We could also have global functions, so we might have a functions file if we want to write functions. So we're going to create a JSON object of global variables. So I'm going to export this so it's public. And I'll just create a global variable called DB. And this is where we need our MongoDB connection string. So the easiest way to get this is I'm just going to go back to MongoDB, the MongoDB panel, in my browser, just go back to my cluster, and I'll just copy this again. And then I'll have to replace the username and password. So again, to get this, if you just go to your cluster and click on connect, actually, I think I can click here, connect your application, and it'll give me the connection string. Or I can take, yeah, I should just be able to take either one. So I'll copy it. I'm going to paste it in here. A couple things I need to change. So the username and the angled brackets. My super secure password. The last thing is it has test at the end. That's the name of the database. So I want to replace the word test with my database name, which is called global food. So there's our connection string. MongoDB is the driver. Our username and password is here. Here's the host name of the server and the database name. The rewrite's true. This part at the end, we don't really need. We can take it out if we want, or we can leave it there. So this way, if we want to change, let's say, the password in the database, we don't need to change it in app.js. We change it in our global config file instead. As I said, we'll use this file later on for things like API keys. So yours would be the same as mine, except your username will be different, password will be different, and the name of and host of your cluster will be different. So you just get those directly from the MongoDB panel. I'll leave this up for a minute. If anybody needs to catch up. Question?
What is the part that you think you remove in that string? What does it actually do?
The rewrite equals true means if we try to do an insert or update and it fails for some reason, it will automatically retry the operation. The W equals majority, I don't know. I would have to look that up. Never used it before, so I couldn't tell you. So now we'll go back to our app.js. So we want to link to our file, which is in config globals. And then we'll use Mongoose to connect. And the first thing it wants is the connection string, which is our. And notice it recognizes, my code editor recognizes the DB variable we put in globals. And then we need to set up a few options as a JSON object. We need to set this URL parser to true. I don't have a good answer for what that last parameter does, that use unified topology. All I know is my database connection will fail without it. Well, I'm not quite sure. You didn't use it and it connected? Okay. I'll put it in and I'll see what happens if I take it out. So we're going to try to connect, and then we want to evaluate if the connection worked or not. So we can chain these events together. Try to connect, and then if we get a response, we can log it. if it works, and if not, we can catch any errors where we'll log it in. Oh, oops, sorry. So we're going to try to connect using our global connection string. If it works, we'll print a message saying we're connected. If it fails, we'll get a connection failed error. So now we should be able to use NodeMon to start the application again. And we'll see which of these messages get printed in the console. So I'll open up my terminal. We'll try NodeMon. Takes a second and it says connected to MongoDB. If I go to my config file and change the password, the application should restart. So I'll just stick in another digit here, and when I restart, it tries to connect. And tries, notice I'm not getting another connected to MongoDB message printed because it keeps trying. This should time out and give me an error sooner or later. Okay, so finally it says, no, your connection didn't work because the password's wrong. I fix my password and hit save, NodeMon restarts, and I'm connected. So we've installed Mongoose, we've linked to it by requiring it. Yep. You just need to require the Mongoose library. So NVU connected without the, all right, I'll try it in mine as well. So you didn't have either of those options? You had the first one, but not the second one. Okay, we'll take it out and I'll see if I'm still connected. It does connect, but it gives us a warning. It says we should be passing that parameter. So it works, but it says it's deprecated that way. Current server discovery. So to use the new one, we should include that option. So I'm going to put it back because it's recommended. So that warning goes away with that parameter. So now we want to create a food model and build a page that will show us what's in the database, if we can. So in my project, we have a controllers folder, which the generator built, but the generator called it routes, and I've renamed it. And we have a views folder. We have no model folder. The generator doesn't give us that. So I'm going to now make a new directory called models. And inside, we want to make a food model. So I'll right click my new models folder. I'll say new JavaScript file, and I'll call it food. So the typical naming convention is our model names are singular with an S. Our controller names are plural with an S on the end. That's how we can distinguish. I'm going to create models, food.js. So we're making a model that will use Mongoose to talk to the database. So just like in our app.js, we're going to require Mongoose. Now, our database is schemaless. So we have this food collection, but it has no structure. We can put anything in it. The structure is in our model. So our model, it's in our in the web application where we set out, this is what a food item looks like. So we'll create a schema. We'll use Mongoose. And we said a food would have a name. Which will be a string. And we'll say it'll be required. So if the user tries to save a new food item and they don't put in any name, Mongoose will return this error that name is required. Kind of like the validation errors we had in our ASP.NET models. Fairly similar. And we want it to also have a country. So that would really be the same. It's going to be a string. We might add to this model later on, but we'll just start nice and simple. We don't need a property for the object ID. MongoDB just takes care of that. Every document gets a unique object ID, so we don't need it to add it in our schema. It's automatic. And then we want to make this model public. Name. So we're going to export it as a new Mongoose model that we're going to call food. So we're defining what a food item looks like, and we're making it public with the name food with a capital F. So this is how we can access this model from our controller. So we'll save our model. So we have a model. We don't have a food controller right now. So we want to create a foods controller that will handle all of the paths for adding, editing, and viewing and deleting food with methods for each one. And all of those methods can use this model. So we're going to right-click our controllers and make a new JavaScript file. We'll call this one foods plural. Our controller's plural, our model is singular. Sorry, I'll leave this one back up for a minute. I'll leave the model up. So later on, if we want to add other information about food items, like maybe we want a photo, we can include that, or any other properties of the food we want to add. We can just modify the model and add the new stuff to the database. We don't have to modify the database itself at all. So in our foods controller, we're going to need to make a few references. We're going to need to use Mongoose in our controller. We're going to need a reference to the model. So the food controller can call the food model. And we'll need a couple of classes from Express. So here was the built-in index.js. So these first two lines require Express, and create an express router to map URLs, we'll need these in our food controller too.
The next slide.
Yep.
That be or is it somehow similar?
No, we're creating a new instance of the express router in each controller. Technically, I suppose you could make that a global object if you wanted to. We don't have to create it in each individual controller. I've never done it that way, but if that's where your mind's going, I can't see any reason why you couldn't do it that way. So then we want to add Mongoose and food model references. So we can do create, read, update, and delete. So we're linking to our model much in the same way in ASP.NET in our controllers. We imported the model namespace. So a product controller could access the product model. So when a user goes to localhost 3000/food, or sorry, /foods, I guess. We want to load a view called foods index. We don't have this view yet, so we're going to need to create it. And we need to make it control for public. So we're not really working with the database yet. We just want to load a view. So if we tried this right now, if I go in my browser to localhost 3000/foods, what do you expect will happen and why? Why will we get a 404 error? Okay, because we haven't built that view yet. Let's try it. So I'm going to go to localhost 3000/foods. And there's actually two problems. So we're trying to load this view that doesn't exist. So we can go ahead and create that view. So inside of views, I want to make a subfolder. I want to put all of the views related to the food items inside a foods subfolder. So I'll right-click views and make a new directory called foods. It's going to go inside. So now under views, we have a foods directory. And then I'm going to make a new, I'll make the file we're trying to load. So I'll make a new file called index.hts. This isn't going in views, it's going in views foods. We already have an index.hts. That's our site homepage. We want a homepage for this section of the site. So call it index.hbs. And I'll just put on an H1 tag. So now my controller is going to look for foods index, which exists under views, food index. So what will happen if I try that URL in the browser now? We get the same result. Will the view load? We get a different error. Okay. So we still got a 404 not found. Why is that? We have a view. That the path to that view is correct. So why doesn't it load? The method in the controller is correct. We're not using the database yet, but it should have loaded. Why didn't it load for us? We need to add something to a different file. How does our application know how to parse that URL? Envy? In app.js, so let's look at what was here. So the express generator said any requests in the root are handled by this index controller. Any URLs that start with the word users are handled by the users controller. Where does it say how to handle URLs that start with the word tasks? It doesn't. We haven't told the application what to do if we get a URL request that starts with the word tasks. So we need to add 2 lines to this file. What 2 lines should we add to make our 404 error go away? All right. Right. So first, let's link. We have to link to our new foods controller. And then we need to map any requests that start with the word foods to be handled by that controller. So we're going to add a reference to our new foods controller. And many URLs starting with foods to be handled by the foods controller. So in ASP.NET, this happened automatically. We just built a new controller and the URLs automatically worked. Not in Node. We manually have to map it. You create a new controller, you have to specify what is the URL path of that controller. It is not automatic, it's manual. So now if we save, so we've added line 13 at the top and line 31. And now if you refresh and go to localhost 3000/foods, we should get a static page loading. We'll just refresh. So now our 404 goes away and it's loading our page. We can also change the link in our navigation bar. Right now, this our food link, it doesn't go anywhere. So how would we change that so that this link works? What file would this be in? So I want to click our food and get this page. So where would we go to change that link? Right? Yeah, if we go to our views and layout, on line 28, here's our food link. So what should this link to instead of star? What's the path? Okay? Right, if I go to /foods, our app now says, oh, okay, any URLs that start with /foods, they're handled by the foods controller. Foods controller says, if we have a GET request in the root, render the index view we just created. So now if I click my nav bar, it takes us here. So not only do we want to load the view, but we also want to query MongoDB, get the list of food documents, and pass those documents to the view. And then we'll need some code in here. We'll need a loop so we can display what's in the database. So we're going to use the food model in Mongoose to select all the foods from MongoDB. So food is a Mongoose model, and it has a find method. And you can actually see all the various find methods that are available in Mongoose. We can find by an ID. These are kind of neat as well. Find and delete, find and update. So we can do those in one operation instead of writing a query first and then doing an update second. Okay, it's a neat method to find something and update it at the same time. So we're going to call find. When we try to query the database and query our list of foods, there's one of two things that could happen. What can happen when we call the database and try to fetch some data? That's one possibility, a good possibility. What do we want to have happen? Right, we want it to get the data. That's the good scenario. What's the bad scenario? We run the query, and instead of getting the data back, we get an error. So when we call find, these are the two parameters. We either get an error or we'll get a list of food back, one or the other. One of these two things is going to happen. Like this. Two round brackets, two opening brackets. So if we get an error, we'll log to the console what happened, so we know why our query failed. If we don't get an error, we're going to get back a list of food. So I'm going to move this statement inside of my else. So if we get no error, render the view. And then I need to render bracket down at the bottom. If we get an error, just print out a message. I guess here we could also send the error to the browser if it fails. So this will load our view if our query is successful. But we also want to give, if the query works, we need to send the data to the view. Right now, this loads the view, but we haven't actually given it the query results. If this food variable that's highlighted in blue, if that's the list of food, how would we pass it to the view? This code's correct, but it's not complete. We did it last week. Let's look at our index controller. So how do we pass data when we're loading a view? We're doing it right here. So we've added, what is this? What format is this? JSON. We called res.render, the name of the view, and then we passed a JSON object with a variable name and some information. So we can do the same thing here. We'll create a variable called food, and we'll pass it a JSON object that has all of the data from our query. So load the view and give it a bunch of data. We'll try it. I'm going to refresh my page. We won't see anything yet. But if the page loads, it means the query didn't give us an error. So that's encouraging. No error showing up. So our code in our controller is done. We've got our model that talks to the database. We have our controller that runs a query. If it gets a result, it loads a view and it sends the data to that view. So the last thing we need is the code in the view to actually show the query result. So I'm going to open up, let's create a table. We'll create a header row. And then we'll use a loop in handlebars to display the food that comes out of our query. So for each food item, we'll show the name and the entry in a loop. Now, I only have one document in the database. If this works correctly, I should get one row showing up on this page. If I go and add another document to MongoDB, I should get two. So this variable here on line 8, it has to match exactly with this one. We're passing an object called food from the controller, and then we're looping through that same property. So it's given me a big loop of one document. If I add something else into MongoDB and refresh, I'll add one more document. Then next week, we'll add it through our application, but I'll just insert one more document. So our view is using handlebars to loop, and our controller is using find with our model to run that query. There's no where clause, so we're just getting all of the documents in the collection. If we wanted, we could select a single document or a set of documents with some kind of condition on it. only show me the foods for India, for example. So we'll add that later on. We'll be able to pick a country and filter our list so we can only get selected documents as opposed to getting everything. So here's our start. So next week, the first thing we're going to want to do is be able to create a form where we can add new foods. So we'll use the Mongoose create method to save, and then we'll want to be able to edit and delete and eventually filter this list as well. So we're going to need a lot of the setup we've already done. We won't need to touch app.js. We won't need to touch the model again. We're just going to need to make some new views and then new methods in the controller for adding, editing, deleting, as well as filtering. So most of our work is going to get done in here now that our application's set up. I will push everything up to GitHub, and we'll continue on working with this next class. Okay, that's it for today. There's no lab, no quiz. Next week, we'll have a quiz, I believe, in 2 weeks, in week 7. There's no midterm exam, but we'll have a review quiz on lessons 4, 5, and 6 in a couple of weeks. Okay, have a good week. I'll see you guys, most of you next Monday, and the rest of you on Tuesday.